John Anderson here, pastor at Resurrection Church, and today I am going to use my limited knowledge to faithfully answer the internet's biggest questions. Let's go. First question is, if Jesus were here today, what type of music would he listen to? I don't know. It's curious. I wonder what type of worship style Jesus would like. I've always thought that if Jesus and his disciples walked into a church where an organ was playing, they would be terrified. But the same could be true if they walked into a church and an electric guitar was shredding a solo in the middle of worship. Yeah, I'm going to probably say he'd love the Lonely Ninjas. Worth a Google. It's right there. Also, I think he would like music that would point us to other people and their needs. Probably more than anything else. And John Prine. I feel like you'd like John Prine. Next question. Do Lutherans have saints? Well, let's turn to the good book and figure it out here. Do Lutherans have saints? Absolutely, you're looking at one. No, honestly though, in the Lutheran tradition, we love the phrase simul justus et peccator. Are you ready to learn a new language? It's language time. In Latin, simul justus et peccator means simultaneously saint and sinner. And the reason we cling to that as a future hope and as a current hope is because in it we're promised and reminded that we are created in the divine. But also we can screw things up. So different than our brothers and sisters in the Catholic Church, God identifies us in our sainthood, but God also knows that we need sanctification to continue that journey. A couple other questions here. What is the difference between, this is a great question, traditional and contemporary worship music? Well, I would start by saying both of those words are made up because we don't even have early recordings of what traditional Christian worship sounded like. We know that it would have been songs probably sung in a chant style. There might have been polyphonic singing, but that's what a traditional worship should sound like if we argue that we should go back to traditional worship. The organ, which showed up much later in some early church hymnody, is a part of what we consider traditional church music, the hymns, the piano. But as we've moved into the last 3 or 4 decades, we've seen guitars and drums and bass guitars and all sorts of other instrumentation, and we call that contemporary. But I think both words fail in actually describing what it is. I think at the heart of it, you got to find a place where you're drawn in to worship through song or through music that works for you. But the words like traditional and contemporary, I think, are just made up. All right, this is a good question. You know, we don't think a lot about Jesus as a kid, but the question here is, when Jesus was a little child, do you think he played with other kids? I absolutely think he played with other kids, and I think, I like to think about my boys and how much they play together. I think Jesus probably would have been that kid in the friend group, though, that probably won all the time, but like you didn't resent him, but you kind of resented him, but you didn't resent him, you know? I do wonder too, like if Jesus, like every now and then, I don't even know what games existed in the first centuries for kids, but like if it was today, like if Jesus like just kind of made the ball go in the hoop, I don't know if Jesus would have done that, but I think I probably would have if I had that power, which is why I'm not Jesus. All right, one question we have here that I want to definitely answer is this. If I'm a follower of Jesus, can I still have doubts? What a great question. You know, this is a question that troubles the church because some pastors, some leaders in church communities will tell you that if you have any doubts about your faith is not genuine or real. I would say nonsense. One of my favorite scriptures is in Matthew 28, and the disciples are walking up to this mount where Jesus is going to give this famous Great Commission. And if you've been in the church, you've probably heard the Great Commission where Jesus says, go therefore and baptize all nations in my name. And it's this beautiful final sending and promise from Jesus. But there's this verse in verse 17, right before that. And in the original Greek, it says this: as they went up the mountain behind Jesus, they worshiped and they doubted. You see, the beauty of faith and doubt is that they are tied together. Doubt is not the opposite of faith. In fact, the opposite of faith is certainty. If you're certain about things, it doesn't require any faith. Now, I think faith implies doubt. And that's the beauty of the church, the ecclesia, is that we come together and wrestle with these doubts. So no, my friend, to answer your question, being a follower of Jesus does not mean that you can never doubt again. In fact, being a follower of Jesus means you're going to have most days where those doubts might overwhelm you. But that's okay because Jesus is with you. All right, next question. Are all Lutheran denominations the same? No, they're not. These are easy.
Is there like anything else you could add, maybe?
Oh, sure, like why they're not the same. Why they're not the same, I'll tell you why. In the U.S., we have 3 primary denominations within the Lutheran tradition. We have the Wisconsin Lutheran Church called the Wells. We have the Missouri Synod Church. Both of those began in the 19th century, and they pull from earlier Lutheran traditions. In the late 80s, three lesser denominations came together to create the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And the beauty of the ELCA is that in our tradition, we offer a bit more of an inclusive community. We ordain women and we welcome them into full service in the church, which is different than our brothers and sisters in the Wells and the Missouri Synod Church. You know what they say? In the Wells and Missouri Synod Church, women can serve chicken at the potluck, but they can't serve communion in church. But it's true. Yeah. What a great question this is. What would happen if Jesus would have been born and lived his life among us now? Unfortunately, I think Jesus still would have been killed, or at the very least imprisoned for the things that he was saying. Nobody wants to hear the message of Jesus that we're supposed to give away all of our stuff. We're supposed to care for the broken. We're supposed to forgive our enemies. I mean, I think the part of the American Christian church that breaks my heart the most, the part that I think would break Jesus' heart, is that we've turned so far away from the teachings of Jesus, and instead we've clung to ideologies and we've politicized the church and we've turned it into a mouthpiece for a candidate or a political party. Jesus wasn't about any of that stuff. Jesus was about knowing your neighbor, your literal neighbor, meeting them where they're at, and doing all you can to lift them up. So what would happen, I think, if Jesus was born today and lived among us? I think he'd be heartbroken. I think he'd end up going to the cross of whatever device we have in the 21st century, and we'd kill him because we wouldn't want to hear what he has to say to us. Hi. One more question? You got it. Tell me, why do you read the Bible? I read the Bible because I draw inspiration from it. I draw the instructions on life from it, and I get to learn about the history of our faith. I also feel that God is with me as I read Scripture. That's the promise of Scripture, is that God enters into it with us. But I think there's some misconceptions about the Bible. The Bible, as we understand it, at least in the American church, the Christian Bible, by the way, didn't really show up in its completed form until about the 5th or 6th century. So think about that for a second. The early church, for 4 or 5 centuries, they didn't have a Bible like we did. This book that we throw around and wave in people's faces as if it's the ultimate authority. For centuries, people had writings and they had the teachings and oral traditions of the church. Today, we have Bibles in all sorts of languages with all sorts of translations. And in some cases, some Bibles have more books than others. What's important to remember when you enter into Scripture is that Scripture was meant to draw you into the story of our faith. And the hope is that God helps you read it. The last word I'll say about reading Scripture is one of the most exciting and important parts of the Reformation for Martin Luther and others is that they believed that we, the lay people, the common people, should also be allowed to enter into Scripture. That's the beauty of the church, the ecclesia, is that we're supposed to read it together. So yes, the Bible is something we should dive into. It's something that we should struggle with and we should talk about and we should even debate about, but we should definitely read it. So I commend it to your reading.